Good afternoon and welcome. This webinar is a collaboration between the U.S. Department of Veteran Affairs, VA Center for Faith-Based and Neighborhood Partnerships, Good afternoon and welcome. This webinar is a collaboration between the U.S. Department of Veteran Affairs, VA Center for Faith-Based and Neighborhood Partnership, CFBNP, and the VA Maryland Healthcare System, Perry Point VA Medical Center. My name is True Lester Pauling. I am the Senior Outreach Specialist in CFBNP. I will be your moderator this afternoon. Everyone's phone has been muted. If you have a question during the presentation today, please type it in the Q&A box on the screen. I will read the questions at the end of the presentation, and the presenter will provide a response. This presentation will be made available after this webinar. This is a live recording. I would like to thank Ms. Nicole Jones for this collaboration. We're grateful for your time today. But before we get started, I would like to introduce Mr. Conrad Washington, Director of the VA Center for Faith-Based and Neighborhood Partnerships. Mr. Washington is a retired combat Marine with 20 years of active duty service. He is a licensed minister, actively serving in his faith. He received his Master's of Divinity in Pastoral Studies from Moody Theological Seminary, Master's in Business Management, and a Bachelor of Science degree in Education. Additionally, he is a graduate of VA's class of 2017 Virtual Aspiring Leaders Program. Mr. Washington?
Hey, thank you, True. I appreciate it. And good day to everyone. Thank you all for joining us again here at the Center for Faith-Based and Neighborhood Partnerships. We're glad you stopped by to hang out with us a little bit as we talk about a very serious topic. I also want to thank our presenter, Ms. Nicole. Thank you, ma'am, for taking time out of your schedule, VA colleague, and sharing your expertise. This month, we know that we celebrate the month of women, Women's History Month, and the theme is Women Who Advocate for Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion. So we appreciate the contributions that women have made to our nation for so long. We also are going into Lent. We want to acknowledge Lent. We want to also acknowledge the Ramadan season that began yesterday. And there's so much as we lead up into Palm Sunday, Easter, Resurrection Sunday, Good Friday. So this is a very important month for those who are of faith. And so we hope that you have some reflection and enjoy your faith as well. I want to take a few moments and just share with you that today we're going to be talking about suicide prevention, and you're going to hear from our presenter some great information. You're going to hear about how it is a national crisis, that it's preventable, and how we all can assist to help in this national crisis. So I hope you pay attention. If you have any questions, please ask her, and we look forward to you all continuing to work with us. So be blessed and enjoy the presentation today.
Thank you, Mr. Washington. At this time, I would like to introduce our speaker for today, Ms. Nicole Jones, who will be providing today's presentation on suicide prevention. Please read a summary of her bio on the screen. Ms. Jones received a bachelor's degree in social work from Howard University. She has worked in substance abuse rehabilitation program and as the inpatient psych social worker. She provides counseling, education, and community support with the goal to reduce the incidence of suicide and increase access to care. Ms. Jones has been with the VA for 23 years and 15 years in the suicide prevention program. At this time, I give you our speaker for today, Ms. Nicole Jones. Ms. Jones?
Yes, good afternoon, and thank you so much for having me here to speak on this very, very important issue. I'm going to jump right in so that we can get started. I'm going to advance my slides. Again, I am the Suicide Prevention Coordinator at the VA Maryland Healthcare System. My office is at the Perry Point site, but we're going to talk about our suicide prevention program as a whole and specifically about suicide prevention with our veterans, what we do with regards to our gatekeeper. Like, how do we know when someone's at risk and how do we get them help? And so that's what our gatekeeper training is about. So really quickly, suicide is an intense topic for some people. So if you find yourself feeling unbalanced, I will remain on in case someone needs to IM me. If you need to talk with someone, we just want to make sure that everyone knows their support. The 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline is available. And also through resources through employee assistance. If you find that you're struggling and you need support, there are resources available. So let me go on to the next slide. Okay. All right. So I'm going to skip. This is our objectives, but basically we're going to talk about the facts about suicide, common myths and realities, and then we're going to talk about the VA S.A.V.E gatekeeper steps. All right. By participating, you're going to learn a lot of information that's going to be super, super valuable. All right. Take a minute to consider, what are your biggest questions around suicide and talking to people in crisis, and actually, communicate that so that we can answer them at the end. We don't want anyone to walk away feeling uncomfortable about asking these questions, because really all it takes is compassion and care and these steps to really help someone who's struggling, may not be able to reach out to formal help, but maybe want to talk to someone about how they're feeling, and you might be that someone. So let's start with talking about the facts about suicide, veteran suicide. Suicide is a national crisis. As Mr. Washington explained, it is a national crisis, and with the rates of suicide rising in the general population each year. For every death by suicide, there are 135 individuals impacted. So when you think about 40,000 people plus dying each year as a result of suicide, think about all of the people left behind that now could be at risk for suicide as well because they've been affected. Suicide is a complex issue with no single cause. Suicide is often the result of complex interaction of risk and protective factors at the individual, community, and societal levels. Risk factors are the characteristics that really make someone prone to suicidal thinking or behavior, and the protective factors are those things that offset those risk factors. To prevent veteran suicide, we must maximize the protective factors, build in a lot of protection while minimizing those risk factors that make someone at risk. And we need to do it throughout our communities and nationwide. So let's talk about the risk and protective factors. So again, the risk factors are those things that are on board that make us prone to suicidal thinking. Oh, okay. It sounds like we're having some issues with forwarding the slides. So I'm going to just, we're on slide 12 now, and I will be requesting that to be forwarded. Sorry for any inconvenience. So as I said, the risk factors are those things that are on board that make us prone to suicidal thinking. Prior suicide attempts. So if someone has had an attempt in the past, they are more likely to think about suicide as an option. And so we want to screen to find out if an individual has had an attempt in the past, because we want to ensure that we're assessing on a regular basis to continue to keep them safe. Substance abuse issues or mental health issues, those really do impact whether someone is considering suicide. Sometimes it's just those things that are piled on top of each other that make suicide an option. And the research also shows that 85% of people who die by suicide have a diagnosable mental health and substance abuse condition. Okay. I'm trying to see if I'm able to slide the deck. I cannot figure that out. So I'm going to move forward. So accessing lethal means, access to lethal means is another risk factor. Because if someone has firearms in the home, or if they have lethal pills like medication, pain medication, that increases their risk for suicide. Legal or financial challenges, relationship issues, unemployment, and homelessness. So all of those are risk factors that really do increase the risk for suicide. So now let's jump to the other side of this particular slide and talk about the protective factors. So the things that can increase protection and decrease the risk are access to mental health care. So if someone is connected with a therapist or a provider that is really evaluating their mental health, it reduces their risk for suicide. A sense of connectedness. And for our veterans, that's important because they come from units where they build these strong relationships with their battle buddies. And for them, a sense of connectedness is important even after the military. But even in the general population, having some sense of connectedness is important. Problem solving skills, being able to really look at a problem and solve that problem, or have good coping strategies when stressors do arise. A sense of spirituality is important. Having a mission or a purpose. And sometimes for our veterans, this is a big one because they may not be able to serve, or they may have been deployed and now they're back home and they feel as though their mission they failed their mission, or they want to return to continue the fight. And so that can be a really difficult transition for our veterans. Physical health, if they have impaired physical health, lack of employment or underemployment can also be factors. And their social and emotional well-being can be a factor. If they're able to maintain that healthy emotional well-being with supports in their social network, it can really go well to keeping them safe. Next slide. All right, so we're going to talk about access to lethal means as a risk factor. Next slide. So I always like to include some of these graphs to really give you a visual of what we are facing in regards to veteran suicide, and really when it comes to the means that our veterans use. So I'm going to just kind of break this one down. It shows methods used in 2023. And if you look to the left side, our veterans, 72% of veterans, 72.20, use firearms as a means to for suicide. And what I will say about that is, if you have a firearm and if you're thinking about suicide, most likely that person is not going to shoot themselves in the foot. And firearms are the most lethal method of self-harm. I heard a statistic, and it took me back when I heard that there were more self-inflicted deaths with firearms than homicides. And I had to think about that for a minute, because on the news, we hear over and over again cases where someone is shot and killed with a firearm. But when you think about that statistic and know that more people use firearms to harm themselves, it's very concerning. And then you compare our veteran population to non-veteran population, and firearms are still a highly used method for self-harm. Over half of the completed suicides use firearms. And so we really have to talk about lethal means and how to keep our veterans that may be at risk, or anyone at risk, from harming themselves with weapons that may be purchased with the intent of protection. Next slide. So what does lethal means safety really mean? In the context of suicide prevention, safe storage of lethal means is any action that builds time and space between a person with thoughts of suicide and a suicide method. And so I'll talk a little through this. One of the strategies that we encourage our veterans and their families to engage in is if they believe that having this firearm is for protection, and they have every right to do that. And so we educate them on just how to keep it safe. So we talk about gun locks, which is a cable lock that goes through the trigger of the gun, and it's stored with a key. And we share that with our veterans and their family members when we're talking about lethal means safety, in an effort for them to engage in some of these strategies. There may be a veteran, and we've worked with some, who felt like they needed that weapon at quick disposal for their safety. And so we talked about other ways that can be healthy to keep them safe, like maybe having a safe that they can keep under their bed that has a fingerprint opening. So all they have to do is touch it and it opens. We talk about storing ammunition separately. Maybe someone has a weapon in the home and it's stored in a gun lockbox, but the ammunition is in the shed because it takes time and space to get from the gun lock to the ammunition. And so some of those strategies are very helpful when working with families that want to keep protection, but also want to make sure that they're safe. Next slide. A little bit more of this discussion of time and space. Research has showed that in 24% of cases, it was less than 5 minutes between the thought of self-harm and action. And in 48, half of those cases of that they interviewed for this research, half of those cases said it was 20 minutes. And nearly 71% said within an hour. So we know that possibly we can save lives if we put time and space between that hour that someone has a thought of suicide to prevent an actual attempt. And the actual graph on the right side, it just shows you that firearm injuries are, for the most part, fatal. I have met several veterans, I think it's 3 veterans that we've worked with in the past, who have actually attempted to die by suicide using a firearm and survived. And they really talk about the moment that they wish they could have taken that away, that impulsive moment. And it really is helpful for other veterans to hear that. But also it's significant to see that all other methods of suicide combined have a low fatality rate, 5%. And so we really want to look at those methods that are mostly used and try to figure out how we can continue to reduce that risk. Next slide. Lethal means safety works. Reducing access to lethal means is one of the few population interventions that is shown to decrease suicide rates. About 90% of people who die by suicide don't go on to, who survive a suicide attempt do not go on to die by suicide. And if we can collaborate with veterans ahead of time to help them survive a suicide crisis, we have likely prevented suicide for the rest of their lives. And so we'll talk about some of those strategies like suicide safety plans that have been very helpful. Next slide. Suicide is preventable. And I say that, but I say it gingerly because one of the things I didn't share that I usually do share is that I was an intern with the VA when I started my career, and I worked with veterans that had substance abuse and mental health issues all the time. Screening and assessing and intervening for suicide was something I was used to doing, skilled at, and confident about. However, in 2006, I lost my own cousin to suicide. And I come from a huge supportive family. And so we understood that my cousin experienced depression. And when he drank, he became even more depressed. But we never, ever imagined he would take his own life. And so that was when my mission moved to suicide prevention, and I took this job in this field. And so I say suicide is preventable with a caveat. As long as we know what we know, we have to know the risk factors, the warning signs, and protective factors, as well as some resources in order to make the prevention work. And so that's why these trainings like this one are so very important. Next slide. I'm going to go over a few of the common myths and realities really quickly. I don't want to take up too much time on this, but next slide. Okay, so here's one. People who talk about suicide are just seeking attention. Next slide. And so, you know, we hear that a lot. Oh, that's just attention-seeking behavior. They're not really suicidal. And I just want you to know that no matter how casually or jokingly someone threatens suicide, you should never ignore it. It really is a continuum of thought, engaging in behavior and planning that goes on behind the scenes before someone says something. And so when they say something, they may be testing to see if people are listening, if people care, if they can get help for that thought that they're feeling without really kind of acknowledging it. So we want to take that serious every single time that we hear someone talk about it. No matter how lightweight it may be, it's okay to go to someone and say, hey, I just want to make sure, are you okay? Because I was worried about you when you made that joke. It's okay to do that. You show that person that you really care. Next slide. The only one who can really help someone who is suicidal is a mental health counselor or therapist. And no, that's a myth, because their family members, friends, battle buddies, employees, there have been strangers that have saved lives just by being compassionate and really meeting that moment where someone is so devastated that they don't want to go on. And the reality is they do want to go on. They just can't go on in the pain that they're feeling. And so remember that you, no matter what you do, no matter what your role is, you can be a significant factor in saving someone's life by just giving that moment of attention to say, hey, you matter, and if you need my help, I'm here. Next slide. As I said, special training is not required to safely raise the subject of suicide. Helping someone feel included and showing them genuine, heartfelt support can make a big difference. Next slide. So now let's jump into the actual steps of S.A.V.E, our gatekeeper training. Next slide. So the gatekeeper training, S.A.V.E, teaches communities how to help veterans at risk for suicide. And it's an acronym. And so basically the VA S.A.V.E will help you act with care and compassion if you encounter a veteran who's in crisis. And the first thing you're going to do is you're going to look out for some of those signs of suicidal thinking. If you recognize those, you're going to say, okay, let me move on to the A. I'm going to ask that most important question of all. Hey, are you thinking about suicide? Once you ask that question and that person, veteran, gives you that answer, you want to validate it. You want to let them know that you might not understand, it may not make clear sense to you, and it doesn't seem like what they're feeling is equivalent to dying by suicide, but you want to validate it because for them it's real. And although they recognize that it's not the best choice, not the only choice, they feel like they have no options. And so you want to be in that moment with them. The E, you want to encourage treatment. I call it the E times 2 because you want to encourage and expedite. You want to encourage them to get some help, whether it means you calling 911, you're calling a mental health program to help them get connected, or you are helping them to develop a suicide safety plan. But if they're immediately at risk and need that help immediately, it might mean that you're taking them to calling 911 or escorting them to the closest VA hospital. But the reality is we want them to know that once they let us know that they're feeling that way, that we're going to help them get help. Next slide. All right, so going into the specific acronym and what it means. So recognizing the signs of suicidal thinking means that you're going to pay attention to what's going on. These are some of the, warning signs that people show when they may be thinking about self-harm. They may be hopeless, feeling like they have no way out. I think of someone who may be facing a divorce or losing custody of their children, facing legal issues, or may have a mental health issue or substance abuse issue that's too overwhelming for them, and they just feel so hopeless. Anxiety, agitation, sleeplessness, or mood swings. And I always focus on the sleeplessness because a lot of the times our veterans will come in to talk about some of those things like their sleeplessness, but maybe not so much the mental health issues. There's a culture in the military that really, has in the past discouraged folks from talking about mental health. It shows a bit of weakness. And when you're in combat, that's important that you don't show weakness. But we're teaching our veterans that it's okay. You're in a space where now we can help you. We want to know what's going on. It's okay to acknowledge these things that you've experienced and get help for it. And so sometimes they're more open to coming in to talking about their inability to sleep rather than anxiety, PTSD, or suicidal thoughts. Feeling like they have no reason to live, like losing that purpose that we talked about. Someone who is rageful or angry and very, quickly angry. So things escalate very quickly. And some of these signs of suicidal thinking, we get directly from the families who see that veteran in their rawest form on their bad days. And so we teach this gatekeeper training to our caregivers and our family members who are concerned about their veteran loved ones, because they may notice those symptoms before the veteran is insightful about them and shares them in therapy or with their primary doctors. Engaging in risky behavior without thinking. I'll share this story. We had a veteran who was brought in by the police because he was driving on the highway at a rate of speed of 130 miles an hour, which is very risky. But he didn't see himself as suicidal. But we did, because his behavior was very risky and dangerous. And he didn't really care if he died or not, but he didn't see it as suicidal behavior. Someone who's engaging in increased alcohol or drug use, or withdrawing from family or friends. It's important that we think about these factors. And when we see them with folks that we're working with or veterans we know, we really want to take some action. Next slide. So again, the presence of the following signs require immediate attention. Someone who is thinking about hurting or killing themselves, and I'll add, and someone else. Unfortunately, over these last 10 years, there's been an increase of mass shootings as well as murder suicides. And so when someone is angry at, or expressing a desire to hurt themselves or someone else, those are the things that we have to take action on. Looking for ways to die, thinking about purchasing a weapon. I always tell family members, look at your internet history, because sometimes what they think they're looking for is what their kids are Googling. And sometimes they find that adults in the home are also who are struggling and maybe Googling things like how to die by suicide, what kind of medications are fatal, things like that. And so we teach families these kind of tips to look and things to seek out in order to identify risks that may be happening right under their nose. Talking about death, dying, or suicide. And I always say talking or posting. We live now in a social media era where people have unfortunately wrote suicide notes on Facebook or live streamed on Instagram a suicide attempt. And so our program, we have folks that comb the internet and especially social media for things that might indicate suicide risk in an effort to help reach out to some folks. And social media has actually become more responsive to the risk as well, where they have built-in applications. If you recognize someone is struggling, you can let Facebook know and they will have someone reach out. I think they're connected to the police services as our Veterans Crisis Line is, so that they can meet with someone or address someone, assess someone that may be at risk more imminently. And self-destructive or risk-taking behavior, especially when it involves alcohol, drugs, or weapons, or even machinery. A lot of people don't know this, but construction is a career where there is high suicide rate. And it may be connected to availability. If you're working on tall skyscrapers and you're having thoughts of suicide, you have access. But what we don't know is why there's a correlation there. But we can go out and talk about these kind of risky jobs and how it is important that people are able to assess whether that's a safe job for them based on thoughts and feelings they may have had in the past. Next slide. The most important thing of all, you can go to the next slide, it's just how to ask that question. Are you thinking about killing yourself? Are you thinking about suicide? Are you thinking about harming yourself? Have you ever woke up and not wanted to be here? All of these are ways. So find your way. I always tell providers, find a way that's comfortable for you, because it's a very uncomfortable question. But it's important to be able to ask. And I'll tell you, veterans and people who have asked that question, who are thinking about suicide, a lot of times it gives them relief that someone is actually asking them about something they've been struggling with, and they were hoping someone noticed. I actually had a veteran that said that to me. Miss Jones, you noticed something that my family didn't even notice. And I said, Mr. So-and-so, your family probably noticed. They've just been afraid to ask. And so don't be afraid to ask that question. It's so important. It does not create suicidal thoughts. That's another myth that people believe, that if you ask about suicide, you're planting the idea in someone's head. No, you're actually saying, I care about you and I want to make sure that you're safe. Next slide. You do want to ask the question if you've identified those warning signs. You do want to ask in a way that isn't influencing the answer. Mr. Smith, you're not thinking about suicide, are you? Well, you've basically told Mr. Smith that you don't want him to think about suicide and that you may not be prepared to have a conversation if he is. And so it's important that you open that question in a way that allows him to say yes and feel comfortable opening up to you about it. Do ask in a natural way that flows in conversation. Oh, Mr. Smith, I'm so sorry to hear you're going through so much. Sometimes when veterans have issues like this, unfortunately, they think about suicide. Is that something that you've thought about? That's a great way to ask. It's natural, it flows, it just says, hey, this is common. It's okay if you are, but let's talk about it. And don't wait to ask the question until that person is, got their coat on and they're walking out the door, because you've already told them that you don't have time to answer it. And so you want to ask in a way right in the middle of the session, during the meat and potatoes of the session, so that they do feel comfortable if they want to share. Next slide. You can go through this, go to the next one. This was a practice one. So the V, validating that veteran's experience. We want to talk openly about suicide. If we have family members that have diabetes, we ask about that blood sugar. We talk about those snacks. So in the same way, we should ask about suicide. We should start asking those family members that struggle to say, how has your day been? I know that that's something that you struggle with. Had you had any thoughts today? Okay. Oh, that's great. To let them know we're with them in this struggle. We're with them in this fight. Recognize that the situation is serious, that People do die by suicide, 45,000 people each year. And so we want to make sure that they know that we are here in the moment and that this is serious. We're not passing judgment, and we want to reassure them that help is available. Next slide. Okay, that's another check-in practice, so we can skip that one. So the E, encouraging treatment and expediting help. And so this just gives you a little guidance on what to do. What should I do if someone is thinking about suicide? And a lot of times veterans will say this: I have something I want to tell you, but you have to promise to not say anything. I always pull out my provider disclosure. Mr. Smith, I understand you want to share with me, but I do have to tell you, if this is about harm to you or anyone else, I can't keep that secret. I care about you too much to let that happen. And so you just let them know that's a secret we don't keep, that we have to get help for them if they're struggling in that way. And you don't want to leave them alone. If they tell you they're suicidal, you don't want to walk out of your office and go to another office, because what you don't always think about in those moments is that someone that is suicidal, they will think about any way to hurt themselves. So maybe you left your desk and they're sitting there, and on your desk are some scissors. You don't think about it on your desk at all until a crisis. And so in our team, we keep all of our scissors in the drawer because we just never know when someone's going to become impulsively suicidal. And so you don't want to leave the room, for sure. You want to be with them within arm reach, and then provide a one-to-one handoff if someone is required to, meet with someone. You want to escort them to the emergency room, you want to call 911, or even a warm handoff to our Veterans Crisis Line. But you want to make sure that you do give them some support. Next slide. When talking to veterans, some quick tips: remain calm. If you freak out, they'll freak out. So don't freak out. Listen more than you speak. Allow them to really talk to you about what's going on. Most of the time, they will give you the information you need to help. They may say, I am so tired of all this going on, but I don't want to hurt my kids. Well, you know that their kids are protective factors. And so you talk about their kids and how much their kids do need them. Maintain eye contact, act with confidence. You don't want to argue. This is not a debate, even though you're right, suicide is not the right option, but you need to be able to meet them where they are. Use open body language. Limit the questions. It's not an interrogation. You want to provide some supportive and encouraging comments, and ultimately be honest. When veterans come to our door, sometimes they have a laundry list of things that are going wrong. And so I'm not going to say, hey, Mr. Smith, we're going to fix this all up. No. But what I will say is, Mr. Smith, I know this is a lot, but what can we focus on today that will give you some hope? And just a little bit of hope is all they need in those moments. Next slide. We're going to go to the next slide. That's a practice. And just remember the acronym S.A.V.E, knowing those signs of suicidal thinking. And once you recognize those signs, ask that question: are you thinking about suicide? You want to validate the veteran's experience by saying, I see that you're going through a lot, and I can't imagine how I would feel if I was in your position. Because you're basically saying, I can't imagine handling all that you're holding up. And then you want to encourage and expedite the treatment. We can go to the next slide. I think this is where we start talking about, we're going to go forward one more. Just a little practice, you can move forward. It's just basically saying, when you go through this practice, what did you notice? And maybe you want to use this as a tool to help you continue to build your confidence. Like, it just asks some questions to help you process the whole S.A.V.E experience. Next slide. You can go to the next one. All right, so these are the debriefs, and sometimes it's important. I'll just say this: whenever we in our medical center have a crisis and we handle it, we do a little debriefing. And sometimes it's important, whether you're warm transferring someone on the phone, it's important to have that debriefing because it's a stressful situation, and you want to process how you handled it and what you can learn from that. Next slide. So now we're going to talk about some of the resources. You can go to the next one. All right, so our Veterans Crisis Line, a lot of people don't know that now you can dial it by just simply picking up the phone and dialing 988. If you're a veteran, you press 1 and you're identifying yourself as a veteran, which means that it's going to go right to our Veterans Crisis Line. Anyone can dial 988. That's really a general national lifeline, but when you press that 1, you're saying, I'm a veteran and I want to speak to the Veterans Crisis Line. And now you can call, you can chat when you go online to veteranscrisisline.net /chat, and then you can even text. And veterans can call for themselves. They can call for another service member. Family members can call if they are concerned about family members and friends. If they're concerned about a veteran, they can reach out and make even a anonymous call. They can say, hey, I'm concerned about my loved one, but I don't want them to know I called. But is there a way that someone can reach out because I think that they're in trouble? So it's a great resource. Next slide. All right, so this is just a little bit to tell you about the work that the Veterans Crisis Line has done. And I'm just going to briefly summarize it. It started in 2007, where we launched the National Veterans Crisis Line. And over the years, we've kind of rebranded it to the Veterans Crisis Line. And basically, we wanted our veterans to know you don't have to wait till it's suicidal crisis. If things are going on that you feel are mounting, call us then so that we can actually help. We launched text. We increased our staff in our medical centers and at our responding centers. We even started a caring contacts program, which is evidence-based. The research showed that veterans, when they receive a caring note in the mail after being seen in the hospital, really keeps them connected with VA services and reduces the risk of suicide and recidivism. So, we engage in evidence-based practices. And we even have our peer support outreach center now that opened in 2021 to really help veterans get support from their peers. Sometimes they don't want to speak to a provider. Veterans will ask me all the time, Ms. Jones, are you a veteran? And I say, no, I'm sorry, I'm not a veteran, but my husband is an Army veteran. And, I try to relate with them on that level, but we have a peer support in our suicide prevention program that when oftentimes veterans are apprehensive about talking to providers, we ask our peer support to really reach out to them and connect in some way that will help us to really provide some formal support. And what I want you to walk away knowing is that we've had 7.6 million calls, 360,000 360,000 texts, 910,000 chats, 1.4 million referrals to VA services or to our VA suicide prevention teams who now actually connect folks to VA services. But the most important number of all is 313,000 emergency dispatchments to homes of veterans or locations of veterans who are imminently at risk for suicide. So those are potential lives that could have been saved for reaching out to the Veterans Crisis Line. Next slide. Just some resources. There's a resource locator. So wherever anyone is, they can go to the veteranscrisisline.net and they can find a resource in their area. Next slide. Some more resources. You can look on that website. You can put in your zip code. It'll tell you where the closest medical center is, as well as who the suicide prevention team who they are. So you can even reach out directly to us. Next slide. Some other resources that may be available, videos that are on the website. Next slide. It says, don't wait, reach out. So we want to make sure veterans know. And Making the Connection is an awesome resource for veterans that may not be connected to the VA. They may have come out of their military experience and engaged in care with Kaiser or Blue Cross Blue Shield, but we want them to know what the VA has to offer and how they can be supported by the VA. So the Making the Connection resource is awesome. It talks about all the things that are available to our veteran population. Next slide. So this is a little bit about firearm safety. There's a website that we share, and it's partnering with the VA to keep firearms secure. And it's called www.keepitsecure.net. And it talks about different strategies that you can use to keep firearms safe in the home. And our VA facility, we give out free gun locks. I know this year we've given out about, so far this year, 2024, we've given out about 4,000 gun locks. Last year we gave out about 6,000. Oh, no, 10,000. So we want to make sure that people have access to means to keeping their firearms safe in their homes. Next slide. I think we're coming towards the end here. Some resources for reducing firearm and other household safety issues. Next slide. An important resource for our LGBTQ plus community. We do have coordinators at each of our medical centers because we want, the military with the LGBTQ population has been, it's been a long road, but what the VA wants our veterans to know now is that we embrace them. We want them to be 100% authentically themselves, and we're creating programs to help support their needs. So we do have the coordinators who really do create programming that is helpful and supportive of our veterans who are part of that population. Next slide. Some mobile apps that'll be helpful. There's a link that you can go to actually look at some of these. All of them are really awesome. The PTSD Coach app also has a feature where a veteran can go in and actually complete their suicide safety plan inside that app, which is really helpful. So they'll have it on the go. And next slide. There's a new safety planning app as well. You can use the scan bar to get right to that, or you can go to Apple Store or Google Play to find it. And I'm hoping this is the last one. I think we're coming right towards the edge, yes. We do have for providers that are in the VA, we have a Never Worry Alone consultative service through our VISN 19. And so if you're in the VA and you want to ask questions about suicide prevention, you can reach out to our MyRIC team at VISN 19, and they actually do consults. So if there's someone that a provider is working with and they really want some more support and help, they can help with that. Next slide. Okay, postvention. So that's something new that we're starting in the VA, really reaching out to families of veterans who've lost a loved one to suicide and providing postvention, which is support for those impacted by a suicide loss. So we reach out to the family, we connect them with resources, because having lost someone to suicide really increases your risk for suicide. And so we want to make sure that veteran families and veterans themselves. We've worked with veterans who've lost, sons or, parents to suicide. And so we provide postvention to help reduce risk for themselves. Next slide. All right. And so this is an awesome slide, and I'm glad it is still on here. VA SAVE training. So this is basically the training that I did today for you is available online. It's free. It's less than 25 minutes long, and it's available 24/7. And this is through a partnership with the VA and Psych Armor Institute. And so basically, if an organization wants to make sure that their staff is competent with veterans' suicide risk, they can actually have them go on to complete this 25-minute course, which is really a lot of what I discussed today. Next slide. Staying connected, some resources so that you can stay connected to the VA and hear about what's going on, our innovative programs. And next slide. Any questions? Time for Q&A.
Thank you, Ms. Jones, for that sharing that knowledge and information on suicide prevention. We really appreciate that. At this point, we're going to get around to any questions we have in the Q&A box. I will read the questions out loud, and Ms. Jones will provide a response. If we are unable to get around to all the questions today, we will take down your question and get the response back to you shortly. We have your email address. On the screen, you see Ms. Jones' point of contact information. If after this webinar you have additional questions for her, feel free to reach out to her. Okay, the first question that we have is from Mr. Gary Lamont Hardy. And his question is, what is the VA policy for veterans diagnosed with a mental health condition and or substance use disorder who has a legal permit to carry a firearm? Under what circumstances would the VA recommend revoking their firearm permit?
Great question. Great question. And I'm going to say that the VA doesn't provoke it. And I'll tell you, in the state of Maryland, Maryland is one of the states that have what we call an ERPO law, Emergency Removal Protection Order. And basically what that is where family members of a person, any person, not just veterans, but family members of a person or provider of a particular person that has been deemed at risk, that has access to weapons, they can petition the court through the judge to say, we think this person is at risk. We believe that these guns in the home will be used for harm to self or others. And what can happen is that judge can determine that the weapons will be removed from the home. But I will say that is in extreme cases. Like I said, if there's imminent risk and providers have details about plans to hurt others, what we want our veterans to know is it's their right to own weapons. We want them to know that having a mental health issue is not going to specifically by itself be the reason that they can't possess and have a permit to carry or possess a firearm. The key is that they're healthy. And so we really educate them on that it's your right to own a weapon, your right to have firearms, but you have to make sure that you are engaged in treatment because your mental health can be a precipitating factor to having those removed.
Thank you so much, Ms. Jones. That was the, I think, okay, here we go. We have one more question. This one is coming from Mr. John Canugris. I appreciate the data presented within the presentation. Can you share the source of the data?
All of this information comes from VA Central Office, which is our Office of Mental Health and Suicide Prevention. They actually created this S.A.V.E gatekeeper training. If I can get your information, I can provide you more specific. I know that the VA has done a series of data, what we call data pools from the veterans population. Our program provides monthly data to national about suicide attempts and completions within our veteran population. So all of the information that we gather locally, we send it to national, and then they collaborate to pull that data all together and give us really some trends and important information that is helpful for our treatment, like research and evidence-based things like that. But I can find out more information specifically, but I do think that they use some of the data through their healthcare system. But I can find out more information if you'd like.
Okay, we can provide you, Mr. Canugris' email address. You have a point of contact sheet with everyone who participated in today's webinar, Ms. Jones, and you can forward that additional information to him.
Okay.
Also, again, one more question from Mr. Dulce Parker.
Mhm.
This to you. The presentation did not mention our health and suicidal concerns for women veterans. Would you care to address that, Jones?
Yes, definitely. And I will say we touched on it a little bit, and maybe I didn't highlight it enough. But when we looked at the methods used by veterans and across the board, you could see how male veterans, the most used method is handguns. And then you looked at women veterans, and compared to the general population, most of our women veterans also choose more lethal means like firearms. And so when we think about, women and men in the general population with regards to suicide, the research shows that men die by suicide more often. However, women have more suicide attempts but die less often because they don't use lethal methods. However, that is not the case for our female veterans because they're trained in weaponry, and they are competent and comfortable with handguns. So that is another big issue. But other issues such as, having a sense of belongingness. We talked about that, and veterans have that connectedness. But our female veterans, there is not a disconnect. We at the VA have to do better about pulling our female veterans in and engaging them because they have so many stressors, and they are often engaged in treatment, but we have to look at their specific issues. So one of the things I know the VA is doing, they do have women's clinic. Our VA has a women's clinic where our female veterans can opt to get their care in the women's clinic, which really does a lot of specialized support for our women, looking at some of the risk factors, postnatal, risk factors and things like that. So we are moving in that direction by highlighting the needs of our women veterans and really meeting those needs in order to reduce the risk for suicide for our females as well.
Okay, thank you so much, Ms. Jones, for your presentation today. That was excellent. At this time, we're going to turn the mic back over to Mr. Washington for closing remarks. Thank you.
Yeah, I just want to take a minute and say thank you, Nicole. We appreciate you sharing your expertise, and thank you all for joining us. We look forward to more webinars every month. Go to our website, and it's time to receive the actual invites that we have. So thank you all, and be blessed.
If you registered for this event, we will provide you with today's handout. A recording of this webinar will be provided on our website at a later date. Please subscribe to our website and Facebook for future webinars and information. This adjourns today's webinar. Thank you so much for joining us today. Have a safe day. Thank you and goodbye.